Good to go. All right. So, what's up, guys? This is the Voice of Motown podcast. I'm Tyler Pepe.
I'm Brandon Cork, and this is a live version of our podcast by two suffering WVU fans.
All right. Yeah, guys, we're just going to be previewing the TCU game a bit. We just recorded our podcast, but we wanted to go live and talk to some people. We're also going to be covering the press conference that happened today as well from Coach Brown, Coach Parker, and Coach Leslie. So let's start talking about it. WVU takes on TCU Saturday. It'll be a night game. Big game for both schools for sure. Like we were just talking about on the podcast, this is really a season-defining game because whoever loses, I mean, their chances of making a bowl game are basically zero. Not saying a win guarantees a bowl berth for either team, but it does keep them in the hunt. And honestly, teams like TCU, who is 3-3, teams like WVU, who's under 500, that's all we have right now is just hope. We just want to win games here and there and keep the hopes alive, because even if you go to a lower ranked bowl game, that is good for your team. You get more practices, you get more exposure being on national television. There's lots of reasons why it's better to go to a lower ranked bowl than to go to no bowl games. And so if you ask me, this is a huge game on Saturday. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. And, kind of the biggest thing for me is that, this is a game that can get us on the right track. Well, our offense could really use some sort of identity or momentum because we have none. Our offense has been just absolutely underwhelming for the past, for basically the entire season, other than LIU. But that I wouldn't really count that as a great performance, even though we put up a lot of points. So, I would like to see us find a rhythm here and kind of figure out what works for us. Figure out ways that we can get creative on offense. Maybe whether that's, getting Jared Deggy going through the air, getting Letty Brown going on the ground, or doing something different, mixing in Garrett Green more, just anything. We need some sort of identity. And I think going up against a defense like TCU's, which is a little porous, gives us a good opportunity to do that.
Yeah, WVU, we're only averaging 20 points a game versus FBS schools. And so if there's ever a team to get back on track for the offense, this is it. I mean, if we can't get the run going against a team like this, I'm not sure when we can. And so once again, big game Saturday, because if we get into a shootout, could be bad. So we need to play decent defense, but TCU is a team you're not going to hold to 10, 14 points. You are going to have to put up points to beat this team. And they do give up a ton of run yards, which we really haven't been able to successfully, consistently do, is run the ball, which is probably why the offensive line is just leaving Daggy back there as a sitting duck. He's just getting lit up on a lot of those pass plays. Whereas if we could establish a run game, it could maybe lighten the load for Daggy, which of course we want to do, because he's an above average quarterback. You can't put the ball in his hands 50, 40 times a game and expect to win.
Oh, absolutely. I think above average might be a little generous for Daggy.
Trying to be nice.
I think we could settle for average there, but that's a good point that, running the ball does open up a lot. But also another thing that running the ball does too is it controls the clock, and against a high scoring team like TCU, who I believe is ranked in the top 25th nationally in points per game. When your offense is a little anemic, it helps to control the ball, have longer drives. And we saw that's what we did against Oklahoma. That's how we kept it close. We, kept the drives long. We wasted clock, and maybe that's something we employ here. The big issue is going to be is, unlike against Baylor, where they had us beat from the first play. They knew what we would bite on. They knew what we were game planning for, and they came out there with the counterpunch immediately. There was no waiting. So they had us on our heels, and TCU saw that tape, and they're a pretty similar team offensively with the heavy running, the, conservative quarterback who doesn't turn the ball over much. And they could do something similar. So the defense needs to have those adjustments in place. And we talked before about how it's kind of hard to see where WVU has made adjustments, but they do need to have those adjustments so that we don't go out there and give up 28 points again in the first half.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing. That's the thing that's given me most hope for this game is we've had 2 weeks to prep. TCU's only had 1 week, and they're coming off a disappointing loss. I mean, it's not a game they were expected to win, but it was a night game versus Oklahoma. And so hopefully we can catch them on a down week. And that's really the thing I'm trying to really get excited about, that maybe we've had a ton of time to prep. We can get rid of a lot of those bonehead penalties and decisions that we've been doing, wasting timeouts, jumping off sides when it's 3rd and long, and then giving a team like Baylor a 3rd and short. Those are things we got to get rid of, because we aren't a team who is talented enough to overcome mistakes. We can't be hurting ourselves. And if we do lose Saturday, I hope it's because TCU was the better team and they beat us. What's killing me with all these games this year, besides the Baylor, of course, I mean, that was not even close, but a lot of these close losses, you look back and you start saying, well, maybe if we didn't do that, we could have won. And a lot of the time it's, we're hurting ourselves, and that's why we're coming up short in a lot of these games.
Definitely. And Charles brought up a good point about how Oklahoma made the switch. And there have been other teams who have made the switch too and been successful. I think the difference here is that, Oklahoma can easily switch to a 5-star top 3 quarterback nationally, where WVU is, Garrett Green, who was a 3-star, kind of under recruited, wasn't a big football player in high school, played a lot of baseball, so didn't get the time in. It's a different scenario, but, the point still stands in that Green has shown success moving the ball on offense, whether that can be, extrapolated across the full game. Can he go out there and take those, 2 or 3 drives a game where he gets a couple first downs and moves the ball? Can he turn those into touchdowns? Can he turn those into, 100, 150-yard rushing games? And how well is he going to pass the ball? But we can't answer that without seeing him play. And I think that's the big thing that's itching, us as WVU fans, is that we see these glimpses of Garrett Green being explosive and doing things that Deggy just can't do, and, helping get out from behind that porous offensive line because of his athleticism. And Deggy's getting killed back there. So, we want to see it, but, it's just kind of hard to understand when Neil Brown talked last week in his press conference about how he wanted to see, he wanted changes. He wanted to do something to shake up the team so that we can get into a better spot. Yet the depth chart is basically still the same. And he already said schematically they're not going to change anything. So, those changes, I think there's a lot of question marks there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the biggest thing, we keep talking about it, I want to see Green in the red zone at the very least. I mean, I understand if you still want to play both of them a little bit. Everyone wants to see Green get 100% of the snaps. I could make an argument for Green or Daggy starting, but definitely from the 20 to the end zone, I want to see Green out there, because the stats, everything we've talked about lately has proven that Green's just more successful, and it opens up Letty a lot too. We need to establish a run when you only got 20 yards to go. The field shrinks. Can't just be running slants all the time like we love trying to do. Hayden brought up a good point. We hired Brown to be an offensive coach, but why haven't our 2 quarterbacks haven't developed? Media needs to ask Brown that question. Me and Brandon were actually having a conversation that Geno Smith was the last quarterback at WVU who started as a freshman at WVU and then went all the way to his senior year. Even when Dana was here, he always had to bring in these transfers, and so has Brown. I mean, he brought in Austin Kendall, Daggy. It is a big question mark and a big concern that WVU's coaches has not been able to recruit someone, bring them in, and coach them up since Geno Smith. I mean, that was a decade ago. It is definitely a big concern. And I'm hoping next year Neil Brown can answer a lot of those questions, because he's going to have, as of right now, unless someone transfers, he's going to have Green, he's going to have Goose Crowder, he's going to have Nico. Those are all his guys he recruited. And that is the big reason why a lot of people want to see Green for these last 6 games. You want to see, what do you got? You don't want the kid to leave and then blow up in another school and you let him walk away because we didn't, see what you had for these last 6 games. So I can see where the frustration is coming from.
Yeah, the one thing that I'm really confused about, and I think Tyler disagrees with me on this point, but, we pulled Deggy in the Army game because he just got shook. Austin Kendall transferred, and Neil Brown even said that last year Garrett Green didn't really develop the way he wanted him to because of the COVID season. So it just doesn't make sense why we didn't grab, even it's a fifth-year senior out of the transfer portal at the quarterback, just in case, Deggy gets shook again, Garrett Green isn't ready, all those scenarios that we're running into now, we don't have a backup plan, or a backup plan that Brown is comfortable with. So, going into the season, I don't see how Neil Brown kind of put all of his eggs into Deggy's basket and felt okay about it, considering that going up against Army, he had to pull them because it just wasn't working. Just kind of concerning. And, I think you kind of hope your head coach is going to think far enough ahead to make decisions like that. And maybe, I could be wrong. Maybe the transfer portal just didn't have anyone out there that he liked, and maybe he did look, but, still kind of a head scratcher that we're going in with two quarterbacks that it just seems like the coach doesn't trust to open up the offense with.
Yeah, and I mean, Daggy must have been amazing versus our defense all offseason, because that's all we heard coming into the season is how much Jarrett Daggy had improved. And I mean, who knows? Maybe the line is a big reason why, because he's just a sitting duck out there half the time. We haven't been able to establish a run game all year consistently. The line hasn't been great protecting him. And Daggy is a pocket passer. I mean, those are just the skills he has. And so maybe that's a big concern. But if it is, then put a guy out there who can run a little bit, which is Green. So definitely a lot of concerns, a lot of question marks. Yeah,
and that's what
I'm not sure.
And Hayden brings up a good point about the scheme too. That's one thing that kind of confused me about what Neil Brown said in the past two press conferences, is that he likes his scheme still. And yet we're still having the same results, and there's nothing really great coming out of it. It's not something that we're all sitting there watching like, oh, we're so close to breaking something. It's kind of the same thing over and over again. We're running inside zone. We're running slants and stops. We'll run, one deep pass every quarter, or maybe two a quarter. It's all very conservative and risk adverse, which is great if you have the talent out there to control the game, go out there and make the plays when you need to. But when you're at a school like WVU, where you're never going to have superior talent to the team that's lining up across from you, unless you're playing, a non-Big 12 or a non-Power 5 school, you got to win some way with schematically. And, that's something that Dana did, even though he wasn't great at kind of managing the game and kind of having balance and figuring out when he needs to use his timeouts and, when he needs to slow down the pace instead of just keeping his foot on the pedal. He was schematically great, and he was, always doing new things. I can't think of anything new that I've seen from the offense since Neil Brown has started here. And that's kind of one of my big things, is that he shouldn't be offensive coordinator. He could probably be a good head coach, but there's just too much, the offense that is stagnating and not seeing progress for him to continue to keep that role. And there's a lot of good young offensive minds out there that, could probably be worth a shot at WVU. And you could cycle through them as you need to, too. I mean, people don't throw a fit if you go through 3 offensive coordinators in 2 years. It's a lot more hurtful if you're going through 3 head coaches, or 2 head coaches in 3 years, though.
Sure. Yeah, and I do think him calling the plays is part of the problems why we're mismanaging timeouts and situations like that, because I think it doesn't work a lot when the offensive coach, or excuse me, the head coach is calling all of the offensive plays. He does need to delegate, give up that duty, and if you can make it work, great. But I think through 6 games, we've proven that it really doesn't work. Hayden says Dana's offense, no matter who he played, was great. And I absolutely agree with that. And it was called the air raid. But if you think about it, he had a lot of great halfbacks, too, in that system, and ran the ball very well. Which, I mean, you have Letty Brown, who's proven that he can put up 1,000 yards a game. And he is on pace to be well below 1,000 yards so far this year. And so I'm with you.
It's just so many things point to the scheme, and yet the coaching staff so attached to it. And I don't really understand it. Like, there's so many different offenses out there and different philosophies that are successful, and you could be successful as a zone read team. You could be successful as a triple option team or a vertical offense. It just, matters what your personnel is. You have to match your scheme to fit your personnel. And it just doesn't seem like our coaching staff is really willing to do that. And it just it's really confusing to me, because as a coach, you want to be competitive and win, yet it seems like they're holding their schematics and, playbook at a higher regard than winning.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, even if you have a bad offensive line, it's not like we're the only team in the nation with a bad offensive line. There's ways around it to freeze linebackers, making them not aggressive. One would be having a dual threat at quarterback who can run the ball. You could do more read options. You can do PROs out of that as well. Because I mean, Daggy tries to do the best he can do, but fact is he just doesn't have legs. So I mean, when he's doing PROs, when he's doing quarterback reads on runs, no, he's not a threat. And so everyone just pressures our wide receivers, who, credit to them, they've been playing very well this year at the wide receiver position. But I mean, there's not a lot you can do when you have no run threat. When people just jam up your wide receivers, it's hard to have a consistent offensive game plan.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think part of our defensive setbacks too, Baylor game was just bad. So it's kind of hard to figure out if that was just us being exposed or if there was something, less to that. But, part of our defensive collapses has been due to them being on the field too much too. So I think it all ties back to the offense. And yet it seems like, we're pointing figures everywhere else except for at the scheme. We're pointing in at Deggy, which he deserves some criticism. The offensive line is obviously bad, but like we've been saying, you can scheme around it. You can figure out ways to get yardage and score points. And a good offensive coach can do that. And offensive coaches who can't do that usually lose their job. I'm kind of hoping that we do see some turnover there, coming into the next season. I hope that, if it's not Neil Brown making the decision, it's Shane Lyons kind of pushing him to say, hey, we've had enough. We need to do something different. Because that's only going to give us at least a different look at what we can do. It may not necessarily work, but it's something different.
Yeah. Michael says it doesn't matter if we change schemes, hire an OC. It all comes down to the offensive line. They're the weakest link. I agree. I mean, I don't think anyone's arguing with that. The O-line is the root of all these problems. But what we're saying is that for 6 games, I mean, I don't know, maybe you guys are seeing something else that I'm not seeing, but it seems like we're calling essentially the same stuff. It's the same game plan every week, and it's not working. So I mean, at some point you do have to try to change it up, use more motion than we're using. I mean, we've thrown out some suggestions, and I'm just not seeing it. I mean, of course, Dagy's his best pass is the slant. He can't really get deep passes off because our line's not giving them a ton of protection. But even the few times that they do, his arm isn't great down the field. And so, I mean, I definitely think there are options. There are things you can do to try to work around it. It's not like we're going to be putting up 40 points a game just because you do something a little different with a bad offensive line. But I'll tell you this much, you can probably put up more than 20 points a game, because as of right now, excluding the LIU game against FBS schools, WVU is averaging 20 points. I mean, that's pitiful, especially in today's college football where, it seems like almost every team can put up a decent amount of points. That's more than just an O-line. That's an overall problem.
And one thing that, listening to Neil Brown's press conference today that I thought was interesting, and maybe it's just me reading between the lines too much, is that he mentioned that, when it comes to adjusting schematics, not changing them, but adjusting, is you take out the plays that don't work. And the one thing that we've seen so much over the season so far today is that Neil Brown just wants to run, these slants, these stop routes for Jared Deggy, and, occasionally takes a deep shot because you have to. But he's kind of running the same concepts over and over again. And part of me kind of thinks back to kind of what I said earlier about not bringing in a transfer quarterback, is that he just doesn't trust or doesn't think or knows that Jared Deggy can't make any other throws. So he's dumbing down the playbook to only those routes where he knows Deggy can make the play. But if we're simplifying it down that much, why aren't we giving Green a shot to do something that could do a little bit more expanded? There are, things that we've heard that, maybe Green doesn't know the playbook as well as he should by this point. But still, to that point, if your offense is just that disheveled, why not get someone in there who can improvise and make some things happen? I think regardless of how bad it might shake some coaches or maybe some players the wrong way, that he's improvising and not running the plays they're supposed to, that can be frustrating. scoring points kind of solves all problems. If you're going out there and scoring more points than you used to, even if you're not doing it necessarily the quote unquote right way, people are going to be fine with it.
Yeah. Whitney says, why can't we get better choices for head coach? I mean, if you remember at the time of the Neil Brown hire, it wasn't like he was the hottest name in football, but he was a young name getting tossed around a lot of schools. And so, I mean, at the time, a lot of people were pumped, me included, when we hired him. And I'm hoping he can still turn it around. I mean, he still is a young guy. It's his third year here. My only concern is that we don't make a lot of adjustments from game to game and even in game. I mean, how many times have we come out strong in the first half and then completely flat in the second half? Because it seems like teams adjusted and made changes at halftime, whereas we just keep running the same stuff and have the same game plan from start to finish, and then we tail off a lot. I'm hoping he can get better. I'm rooting for Neil Brown. I am a fan of his. I'm not one of those guys begging for him to leave town, but I definitely need to see changes within the next year and a half. I think these last 6 games are going to tell us a lot. Some WVU fans are like, the season's over. Who cares about these games? I'm not going to watch. I'm going to watch every second of all these games because it's going to tell us, are we willing to change and make maybe pull veterans who we thought would never get pulled and maybe starting some of these younger guys. We definitely need to see who's on board for next year. I know we've already had some transfers. Maybe those guys weren't buying in. Maybe Neil Brown and those guys just didn't see eye to eye. I don't know what it is. But I definitely want the coaches to have the guys here who are buying into their system, because that's the only way it's going to work. And if in the long run it doesn't work, then so be it. But for now, I want them to have the guys they trust and try to win ball games with it. The thing is, if it's not working, you do have to have the guts to make some changes.
Absolutely. It looks like we've got quite a few new people here, so I just want to kind of mention that you can always check out our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and anywhere else you can check out your podcast. We try to put out 2 new episodes every week, so just keep an eye out and give it a listen.
Absolutely, yeah. And we'll try to go live at least once a week because we enjoy talking to you guys. We enjoy your questions. And, we're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. If you guys ever want to just shoot us questions, we'll bring them up on the podcast for sure. We love it when we get questions from you.
Absolutely.
Scared. So Keith says Green can't run. He looks scared. I mean, he does look inexperienced without a doubt. He does seem to have happy feet. You can maybe chalk that up to the line being not so great this year, maybe because he's young and that's just how he played in high school and he was more athletic than most kids on the field. But my argument would be you got to put him out there and let him learn a little bit. Here's the thing. If we play him these last 6 games and he just shows zero improvement and we know he's not the kid to start next year, well, then and then it's up to Goose Crowder or Nico to step up and be the starter next year. But the thing is, you're not going to really know what you have in Green just playing him a handful of times every game. So I'm not saying you have to play him 100% of the snaps, but I definitely want to see him out there more than we saw him, say, in the Baylor game.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, I said this last time we went live too, but I would like to see Green at least see the majority of the snaps, if not start the next 3 or 4 games, because I think that will give us a good idea of what he can and can't do. And then the last 2 games, if he's just not doing it, then you could start Goose, because then he has, almost a full season under his belt in practice time. He should have the playbook down, and you could kind of get another sense of, what he's going to be next year. Obviously, since he's a true freshman, he could grow a lot over the next season, especially with a full off season of weight and conditioning. So getting stronger is important. You don't want to be a string bean and get killed out there in the pocket, especially with our O-line. But, we have talent coming in next year with Nico and a lot of other players on the offense, a great recruiting class. So, it's helpful to have an evaluation against live, real opponents now, so that next season you can kind of measure that against what you're seeing against practice competition.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very unlikely Nico will start as a true freshman. I mean, that would be great if you're able to plug him in and he's able to keep up. But I mean, most of the time when you get true freshmen coming in, they're not ready to start in year one. And so more than likely Green or Goose is your starting quarterback next year. So again, start getting those guys a little bit of experience now so that you're not starting from scratch next year, because I don't think Neil Brown's on the hot seat. I think there's like 0% chance he's getting fired at the end of this season. However, if he comes in next year and has a very similar year as to what's going on this year, I think he could be in trouble. And so I think it would benefit not only just the overall team, it would benefit him too if he has a better idea of what he's working with at starting quarterback going into next season.
Hayden asks, will Deggy be able to come back next year? Yeah, he's able to, because last year was the COVID season, so he basically gets a free year. It's something that we kind of talked about before. I'd be open to have him coming back as a graduate assistant, because I do think, as far as understanding the playbook and, doing that sort of thing, he could potentially be a decent coach. Maybe not necessarily WVU, but somewhere. But, getting his career started here is always a good thing, because it's good to have those connections. But I honestly don't think it's the best thing for WVU. I mean, he's already kind of left a sour taste in people's mouth this year just because of his limitations. Part of it is the O-line too, since he isn't a mobile guy. But, I just don't see what he can come in next year and prove. I don't think he's going to come in and be able to be a 4,000-yard passer, 30 touchdowns, and completely turns around the offense. I don't think that. I don't think any of the fans think that, and I don't think the coaching staff thinks that. Or if they do, then, I kind of question their sanity. But, we need something different. And, if the big excuse is that, Green doesn't know the playbook, he doesn't know how to run the offense yet, he doesn't make good decisions, and with Crowder, it's just inexperience, he's too young, then this whole season and then the offseason should be enough to dispel those. And if Deggy would come back and still beat out those two, then I think it raises question about, one, is Green and Crowder just not talented enough? Or two, is, Deggy just a coach favorite who is going to win regardless?
Yeah. We talked about this last week on the live. If Deggy wants to keep playing quarterback, I think it would be better for him and WVU if he went to maybe a smaller school to compete. I don't think he's a terrible quarterback. I just think if he went to a lower level school, he'd probably be pretty competitive and be able to help that team out. I don't know what his intentions are. I haven't really heard him talk about playing next year, so I don't know if that's even a thought in his mind. I think if they brought him back to start next year, I think some fans' heads would literally just explode at the thought of it. So, and we would lose a lot of young quarterbacks. I mean, Green, Crowder, and Nico having to sit out an entire year next year too, while Deggy starts. We'd be losing one or two of those guys. So I think that would just be bad for both parties involved. So I would totally be open to him coming as a graduate assistant, like Brandon said. I think that would be good, but I wouldn't want to see him suiting up to play again next year. That's just me personally.
The one thing I'm kind of curious, we've been talking quarterback a lot, and we have touched on the offensive line, but, I think that's something interesting to talk about too, because we do have guys that I think can grow and get better. Obviously, Zach Frazier is probably our best offensive lineman. He's only a sophomore, so he's going to be great. Doug Nestor kind of was disappointing so far this year, especially with all the accolades he had coming out of high school. He started for Virginia Tech and then transferred here. But, kind of the other three, there's a lot of question marks there. And Wyatt Milam is one of the guys who, came in as a true freshman and is probably just too young to start right now, but he's a guy who could really come in next year with a year in that strength and conditioning program and get better and be someone who changes the offensive line. But that still kind of leaves, one or two spots open for someone else. And we haven't seen anyone else really rotate in except for Jordan White, and he rotated in for Nestor. I do think long-term Nestor should be the answer because he does have kind of the pedigree, so to speak. But, that left side of the line, is Yates and Gamitter the answer? Are those guys that are going to be solutions long-term, or do we have guys below them like Hubbard and some others that I'm probably blanking on their names? Do any of them have enough talent to grow and take over one of those jobs next year? I think that's going to be huge and important because you need competition, but you also need guys who are able to continue to grow as players and not stay stagnant. I'm not sure if that's something that is also tied to the offensive line coach, but that's another area that I'm highly questioning if we should make a change there as well, because again, just not a ton of growth, and going into next year where we really need to see improvement there as well. Um, it's important to question everything, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And not only just the players on the offensive line, but Neil Brown has to start looking at his coaching staff and who he wants to bring back next year. And I think Matt Moore, this is basically, if I was head coach, this would be his trial run these last 6 games. I have not seen a ton of improvement coaching wise on the offensive line in these 2.5 years. So I think Matt Moore should be up for evaluation right now, and Neil Brown should be thinking about whether he wants to bring him back next year. Hayden asked, what do you think about bringing Pat White in for a quarterback coach to help Green, Crowder? I mean, that's always an option. However, I mean, you have to consider most of the time these head coaches already have connections with coaches, and those are the guys they typically like to bring in. I know Pat White's doing pretty well coaching. I think he's in one of the Florida schools as of right now. I know he's hopped around a little bit. He's from the South originally, so I'm sure he likes working down there, probably close to his hometown, close to family. So I'm sure a lot of WVU fans would be open to that, but I'm just not sure that would realistically be on the table. What do you think, Brandon?
Yeah, I'm fine with that, but I'm kind of the person who I'd rather kind of bring in the best at the job rather than someone who has connections, even if that means they leave in a couple years. Because I mean, you know, it the stability, the most important position of stability is the head coach. But if you can get position coaches and coordinators who are cycling in and out because they're too good and they get hired by someone else, that's a good problem to have. And that also helps encourage other coaches to come into your program that are young and talented and want to show off their skills because they know that you're a place that gets hired to other schools. So I just want the best people from the job that we can find. I don't care if they're friends with Neil Brown. I don't care if they're enemies with him. I don't care if they have a connection to the university. I just want to bring in the best guys so that we can put out the best product every week.
Yeah, I'm with you there. That's a good point. Brandon mentioned it earlier. Don't forget to check us out on Spotify, Anchor. We have lots of different platforms. Just look for the Voice of Motown podcast. If you guys like listening to us, we make a podcast at least once a week. I mean, we've been going live 32 minutes. Do you guys have any more questions for us? We don't want to drag on. We love talking to you, but if you guys don't have any more questions or comments or want to hear us talk about anything, we'll probably be hopping off here soon. We did just make a podcast for the TCU game, so if you want to listen to the preview of the TCU game, it's on there. Yeah, I definitely think it's a huge game though for both teams. Whoever loses, chances are they're not making it to a bowl game, and both teams, who knows? Neither of them might not make it to a bowl game. But if you look at who is left on each team's schedule, that we each have Kansas left, which you would hope at least is a win for both. But other than that, I mean, they're all difficult games. It's actually a very similar schedule for both teams who's left. TCU has Baylor, which of course we've already played. And TCU has already played Texas, which we have left. But I think other than that, it's basically identical other than those two teams.
Yeah. And getting back to the podcast too, for anyone who does listen, we're working on getting out some new kind of content, something a little bit different over the next few weeks. So we hope you'll tune in and check that out. And if you guys have any suggestions, things that you like, things that you don't like, feel free to shoot us a message. We want to put out something that everyone enjoys listening to and includes stuff that you enjoy hearing. So we're always open to suggestions.
Absolutely. All right, guys. Well, seems like that's it. It's getting late, so that's a wrap for tonight. We appreciate you joining and taking part in the chat. Thanks, Hayden. We appreciate it a lot. We really do.
Absolutely. I love it.
The strength program. You got any comments on that, Brandon?
I think Mike Joseph has done a pretty good job over the course of his career. I mean, from everything that I've heard, it sounds like a lot of people think that he's one of the tops in the program. Even under Dana, because he was here with Dana, he was constantly, you remember in the NFL combines where you had Tavon, You had Kevin White. You had all these people just killing the combine. I mean, that's physical tools, and I have to attribute some of that to Mike Joseph. So I think he's a keeper. I'm not sure if anything's changed with the coaching staff and how they utilize him. I'm not close enough to the program to kind of comment on that, but I do think Mike Joseph is a great guy to have on the program.
Yep. That was a good question, Donald. Thanks for asking that. Anything else, guys? Nope, that's it. All right. Well, that's a wrap, guys. This was the Voice of Motown podcast. Thanks for listening. I'm Tyler Pepe.
I'm Brandon Cork, and thanks everyone for checking in.
Thanks, guys.